not a saint, I'm just a sinner that keeps trying. I speak my truth, I find it easy.
Morning everybody, welcome to the next Creative Isolation and Beyond interview. This morning we're talking to Jess Skelton, the lead vocalist and sax player from the band Skelton Collective. Founded in 2017, the band also includes Craig, Deb and Daniel. Their music is technically called adult contemporary pop, but I'll get Jess to explain that later on. Bob Gordon from Around the Sound is quoted as saying, when the band is playing, I can see the joy in their faces, everyone's actually, whenever the Skelton Collective play. So Jess, thank you very much for being interviewed today. It's really nice to meet you again because I've seen you play several times and thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. It was fabulous. So my first thing I wanted to ask you actually, tell me a bit about the band and how you formed and who the members are, please.
Fun fact, the band is actually all family. So Craig and Deb are married, they're my parents. And then Dan is my little brother, which is funny because he's very much taller than I am. And so what happened was Dad has been a professional musician for years and years and years. He started out in sort of the East Coast throughout the 80s, and then he moved to Perth and did his degree at UWA, and that's where Mum and Dad met, which was adorable. And so he's been a musician for decades, and he kept trying to find places where he could explore his own craft, not only with other people but also by himself. And all the way along there was groups that he was in that he loved, but it meant that there wasn't always a chance for him to explore a different side of the music that he wrote, the stuff that was a bit more poppy, the stuff that was a bit more light, the stuff that was a bit more piano driven, because he's spent so much of his career doing rock things, so quite heavily influenced by guitar and sort of the more aggressive side of rock, I guess. And so he was talking to Mum on one of their long beach walks that they do because they're sickeningly adorable. And he was talking about how he just wanted to find a group that he could explore that other side of his music with. And Mum very helpfully reminded him that by that point, myself and Dan were old enough to do band things, to go and perform. And why not try working with people that you live with or have worked with in the past in other ways. So we ended up rehearsing as a group, mostly on some of Dad's original stuff first. This was early 2017, and then as we've kind of progressed, we found that we fit together really well as a band, which was fantastic. And so as we've gone, we've all kind of pitched in and we've become more collaborative, and we've just kind of seen what happens.
I can't believe that you've really only been going for nearly 3 years, because you do seem so together. So your music together is just magical.
Thank you. Yeah, I know. It surprises me sometimes. Sometimes it feels like we've been doing it forever, and sometimes it feels like we've only been doing it for a couple of months, because it's still that level of exciting all the time, which is awesome. So yeah, it's I think the reason why it feels so easy is because we've known each other for so long outside of being in a band. You know, like we've all been living under the same roof for however many years. So because we're a family, we have that sort of camaraderie that comes with being in a healthy, good family dynamic, which we are very lucky to have.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. That's really nice to hear. So I'm going to go on to you now.
Oh, goodness, okay.
just for a bit. So how and where did your love of music and your love of the voice start? Because you have a very lovely voice. So how did that start?
That's a good one. Well, like I said earlier, like Dad went to university doing music and composition, and he met my mum there who was doing musical education. So I've kind of been biased towards music my entire life. I've always been surrounded by music when I, right from the word go, because I would sit on my dad's lap while he did music assignments, and I would, help Mum do some of her early education in music classes because I was a toddler as well, and all that kind of thing. So all the way along, I've been just surrounded by music, which has been fantastic.
When did you start to sing?
Very early. I've always loved singing. I honestly can't remember a time when I wasn't singing in one way or another, but I never really got any formal lessons in it. I guess because of the way that my family was so very musical, when it came time for me to get lessons in things, it was always lessons in things that I couldn't pick up from around the house. So I went and learnt the violin, and then I went and I had a couple of lessons in the piano, but they were mostly an excuse to spend half an hour with my dad when he was teaching piano, because he got very busy and I didn't see him very much. And then in high school I learnt the saxophone, and then everything else has kind of been self-taught, which is fun. I remember playing the piano at home one afternoon and getting a note wrong, and my mum yelling from the kitchen while she was cooking dinner, "The other flat, darling!" So it's always been that kind of learning by doing, which I appreciate, because it meant that I was able to explore and develop myself independently, while still getting the feedback and the background that I needed in order to be able to do what I do. So, I've sung in choirs a lot when I was younger. I was in my primary school choir, and then my high school choir, and then a few others here and there. I was in the Choggum Mass Choir in 2011 when Choggum came to Perth. That was an experience and a half. I was performing with students from all around Western Australia alongside really, really famous people like Sebastian, for people like the Queen of England. So I was on international television singing for like the Queen of England and the Prime Minister of Australia and all the dignitaries from all of the Choggum nations.
So I suppose then what you're telling me is that audience fear is not an issue?
I always get nervous after I've performed. Before it, I kind of get quite reasonably chill. I think I kind of psych myself into at least appearing very relaxed. And then
You certainly do.
Oh, thank you. I do my falling apart afterwards.
Okay. Well, okay. That's really an interesting perspective. Now, what's your favourite instrument?
That's a tricky one.
It could be your voice if you wished, because that is an instrument in itself.
Oh, absolutely. I teach music. I'm always telling people that the most important part of your instrument is the proper posture, the proper maintenance, and it's the same with singing. Absolutely. I think from the one that I always just kind of go back to, the one that I love to just sit and noodle on, is the piano, my baby. It was my first instrument. There's photos of me at the age of 2 sitting at the piano. And it's always the one that I have found easiest to express myself with.
That would be the hardest one, though, to do in public because you wouldn't always
Yeah,
have
I know. Funny that. In terms of performing, I love the voice. I love being able to sing. I love being able to tell stories and convey those stories in my own way. And that just happens to be singing. You know, on a performative level, I do love singing the most. Because it is one of those things where I can engage with the music and engage with other people in unique ways. One of my favourite things about creating in general is being able to make people feel emotion. And so for me, singing is the one that I find the easiest to do that.
Actually, that leads into our next question extremely well.
Hey.
So education at school, then if your home life was mainly where your music came from, then did school and education play a part in developing your career?
Yes, they did.
Oh, and who was your favourite teacher?
That's a tricky one. So in primary school, for at least some of it, my mother was actually my music teacher because we ended up at the same school, which was fun. But then when I went to high school, that was when things really started to kind of explode. That was where I learnt the saxophone, which has kind of become one of the major tools of my trade, funnily enough. And then I got to learn under the fantastic Julie Roberts, who is a prolific music teacher. She's fantastic. And she really inspired me and pushed me to just seize every opportunity that came my way, definitely. She pushed me to explore different aspects of music. She, funnily enough, pushed me to stick with music. I nearly dropped it in year 10.
No.
I know. I nearly did.
The world would be a very sad place if you stopped singing.
Thank you. But yeah, no, I very nearly stopped in year 10, but a combination of my parents and Julie helped convince me to stick with it for my upper school, which was fantastic because it meant that I was in a really good environment to be creative and to explore. So music definitely then played a huge part in education. And then when I moved into uni, I did a couple of music units as well. But when you say about who my favourite teacher was, funnily enough, my favourite teacher, the teacher that really kind of shaped my future the most, was actually my English teacher, my literature teacher, a wonderful woman called Lisa Black, who just sparked my love of literature in a way that I hadn't even realised was possible. I've always been an avid reader and I've always been hugely involved in reading and writing literature, but she really inspired me in a way that I wasn't expecting. And it was because of her that I ended up doing my degree in English and Cultural Studies. So I went from doing just English and literature in high school to doing an entire degree on it. And that has really helped with my lyric writing.
That was actually going to be one of my questions. Who creates the lyrics and who writes the music in your group?
Yeah, so with this one...
But predominantly, I guess, because I guess you all take turns?
Well, it's not so much taking turns, it's very collaborative in that someone will bring an idea to the table and then we'll all run with it. There have been a couple where either Craig has come with a complete song because he's kind of been writing the longest of all of us, and there was a couple of times where I came in with a complete song. But for the most part, someone will bring in an idea, and the idea will come from all of us or one of us, and then we all work together to build the song. I usually write the lyrics, considering I'm the one singing, but it all becomes a huge collaborative effort. In fact, there's one that we're working on at the moment where the main idea, the riff, came from Daniel, who's our drummer. So he came in and he was like, yeah, I've just been noodling on the guitar, and he played this riff for us, and now we've got this full song, and it's just waiting on the lyrics.
All right. Well, so I know that you have a song that has come out, and gosh, look at those shoes, which I know very well.
I love them, thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure. I actually painted them for you.
You did?
Yes. So these shoes are sort of in... Just waiting till that.
Wait for the track.
Yeah, just restart the question mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do I do the shoes again? So, Jess, I know you're wearing some very special shoes today that I actually happened to paint for you, and I'm sorry they took so long.
No, I love them, thank you.
Wow, and they're actually based on your new single called Coffee and Toast.
Yes.
And I actually love what you've put on your page. It says that it's raw, honest lyrics balanced with a quirky, upbeat sound, all about being okay. And it's based on sort of experiences to do with anxiety, other mental health issues, and shining a light on darker thoughts, but still remaining positive. Can you give me a little bit of background about this gorgeous song, which I've heard this morning?
Thank you. So with this one, lyrically is very much my exploration into my own issues with mental health. So I have struggled with anxiety and depression for the vast majority of my life. I got diagnosed properly sort of 2012, 2013 after my family home burned down. That was kind of the trigger to get the diagnosis. And I have always sort of struggled with feeling very unworthy, feeling very isolated in my experiences, feeling like I don't deserve a lot of things, and I'm not entirely sure where that all came from, but I've been feeling these things for longer than I can remember. So when it came to this particular song, I just had this idea of the words that hold me close, don't let me go, tell me useless things I don't need to know, which was reminiscent of a time not long after my house burnt down, where I was staying with a friend of mine, and we just kind of pushed some mattresses onto the floor and kind of lay as close together as we could, and she just started talking about random things. I think, what book she'd been reading most recently, what movie she liked, whatever just popped into her head, and she just let me sit there and listen and just feel and be. And I kind of started crying about 10 minutes into it, and she just kind of held my hand and just told me useless things that I didn't need to know. Just let me...
But her voice was very calming.
Yeah, just let me exist in that space for a little while. And that sort of feeling of just having someone there and having someone just exist in that space and let you exist in that space and just be completely supportive and just have that room to have a cup of coffee and to feel hope, which can be really hard when you're in that space.
I love the title. I love it. Because, being a coffee addict myself,
yeah.
and going through some of the things that you've also mentioned all my life, basically.
Yeah.
I think a lot of creatives Do you think that is a predominant thing that a lot of creatives do happen to go through?
I think that a lot of creatives, because part of the creative process is being so connected to emotion, yourself, your own emotions and other people's emotions, I think that it makes it definitely something that can happen. Because you get so invested and so involved in emotion, and you have to have that level of empathy, not only for other people but also for yourself. It does mean that it's a risk that comes along with it. You know, a lot of the most kind of prolific artists, prolific visual or writers or comedians or singers, a lot of them do struggle with things like depression and anxiety, and I think that a large part of it is because emotion is so intimately tied into the creative process that you do just cross that line whether you want to or not.
I know there's a lot of actors as well.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of Peter Sellers, for example.
Yeah, there's a few out there. I mean, I found out recently that Anthony Hopkins, prolific and insanely good, got diagnosed with autism when he was like 70, because he got so good at masking that he turned it into a career. So, you know, like there are always people who have those sort of interesting perspectives, those unique outlooks on life that then turn that into a creative medium for other people to sort of experience and see.
So do you find that now that you've written that beautiful song, have you had any feedback from young people or people that are going through the same thing and saying to you, well, thank you for writing that, because I listened to it and felt, wow, that's so positive, but it could, you know, puts a positive spin on things that we do go through.
Yeah, well, yes, I have. There's one like fan of the band who is very sweet. Her name's Jamie Lee, and when she first heard the song, she came up to me and went, "That song's about anxiety." And I went, "Yes, it is." And she's like, "I could tell because I listened to it and I went, that's me." And so the fact that it does connect to other people and it lets people know that other people do feel that. So, you know, they go, "Oh, I recognise, I identify with that." That means that she must identify with it as well, which means that there is that person that you can talk to, or there is that feeling of solidarity there, which is really important. So I have had people come up to me and be like, "Yeah, I understand that. I've felt the same way," and I've had people tell me their experiences, and it's always a good conversation starter, if nothing else.
Actually, you know, this leads me to think about people don't think that there's a few people out there that don't really think of the arts as being an important part of our community and you know, as important as another career, if you like. But really, when you think about it, it really connects us all together, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I think for starters, those people who think that art isn't, and creativity in general isn't particularly important, has never driven a car or looked at an advertisement, because all of those things, you know, everything on TV, everything we see around us is all creative. It's all to do with art, architecture, car design, clothing design. You know, obviously they've lived under a rock, never worn pants. So, you know, it's something that I think is so deeply ingrained into human existence that people forget how deeply ingrained it is. Yeah. They don't realise how important it is. But I feel like creativity in terms of visual art, stories, singing, those sorts of mediums, they are especially important because they are a universal language. They help to connect people across all sorts of barriers. They help to invite people into experiences. They help people to process their own experiences. And they're a source of representation and a way to battle isolation, which a lot of people feel, especially right now. And it's really hard to not feel that way. That's all good. So, yeah.
So, I was actually going to ask you, and I've forgotten to ask you this one.
That's all right.
Did music help you in difficult times as a young person, and has it helped you now?
Yes, it has. So I mentioned a little bit earlier how my house burnt down.
Yeah.
So before that, music had definitely helped me to process emotions and to feel less isolated. I went through my own sort of emo punk phase, as we all do. And so, you know, hearing music express a lot of the emotions that I was feeling as a young person really helped me to process my emotions and to not feel as isolated. And then when the house burnt down, that kind of really solidified how important music was to me, because it helped me to really process what had happened, not only by listening to music, but then also by writing music. Music became an outlet for me in a way that it hadn't really been before. Before, I was performing stuff that other people had written and luxuriating in the feeling of that. But then my own writing of music really kicked off after 2012, because it became sort of the only way I knew how to express myself in that time. I really struggled with speaking and talking about my experience and talking about my emotions.
You said it was your family home, didn't you?
Yes.
So everyone in the family being creative and musical. So I guess you all have your different things in life that are affecting you. This is a really interesting thing, because you've got a whole family full of it. So how do you choose who gets to do what? And do you ever have a time where you think, no, you know, it's my time? You know, how do you choose what gets put forward, and or do you have a really good balance with that?
I was going to say we kind of have a really good balance. As far as using sort of creating music as an outlet, all of us do it, and we all bring those ideas to the table, and we all kind of have those songs where we've brought our emotions, we've brought our feelings, and we've brought our ideas. But then as it becomes a collaborative process, we kind of all pitch in and we all kind of support the initial emotion and bring our own emotions to the table, and it all becomes a bit like group therapy. It's great. in some cases, in the more light-hearted sort of songs, it's all just us having a good time, but in those ones where it is a bit more emotional, like Coffee and Hope, or there's another one that hasn't been recorded yet called Lullaby, which was a song written about a family member who lost their child, they lost their child days before the due date. It was a really, really difficult time for them especially, but then also for the whole family, because we were all so excited. So we, you know, in trying to process that grief and that upheaval, because it was something that we had all kind of had months and months to prepare for, and then it was just gone. So, you know, we ended up writing a song about that as well. And, you know, those sorts of songs.
What a lovely tribute.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It's honestly one of my favourites to sing. I don't get to sing it very often, but yeah, it's one of those ones that doesn't really get played very often because it is so emotional. And it's one of those ones where you can't really put that sort of positive, hopeful spin at the end of it because it's something that happened. So it's one of those things where you have the emotions and you work through the emotions together. So when it comes time to choosing what to record, it's generally a group choice. We all kind of as we've worked through them, there's always one that kind of emerges as the one that's the next one to record for whatever reason. Like when we did Coffee and Hope, there was Coffee and Hope, and then there was another one at the same time that were both kind of getting moulded and created. But as we got closer and closer to choosing, one of them just kind of naturally pulled forward, which is how we ended up doing Coffee and Hope. And then likewise, there's one that we're recording we've recorded and we're in the mixing process for right now. And it was the same thing. We had that song and then we had another one, and it just kind of naturally became the one that we were going to do next. So it kind of doesn't really have any tension connected to it, because by the time it comes to the point where we're choosing, it's kind of the natural choice.
Actually, I just had a thought. So I'm thinking, so the band members are all family members.
Yes.
And they're all from different eras.
Yes.
So, some of you would have favourite music from your certain era and some of you would not. How do you choose? Well, who is your favourite, or who are your musical influences, Jess?
Right.
And does that sometimes play with your choice of lyric or music? So how do your brother and you kind of have a particular contemporary era that you'd like to push forward a little bit more compared to your parents?
That's an interesting one. I think yes and no. It's interesting because we're so musical. Obviously, Dan and I have been introduced to and influenced by the music that our parents have been influenced by, because that's the music that got played around the house. So, my dad's favourite band of all time is a prog rock group from Canada called Rush. And he loved all things progressive. So, there was Rush, there was Yes, there was Toto, there was all these kind of European and Canadian prog rock and prog metal influences. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, you have my mother, who loves artists like Tori Amos and George, which was an Australian group, and she loves lots of classical music, and she loves things like Pink Floyd. So there was all of those sorts of influences as well. Vanessa Amorosi was another one she loved. So we had this very eclectic musical upbringing. So when we've kind of come to the point where we're going and expanding and exploring in our own way, we then kind of almost naturally go to some of the more interesting and less well-known things.
I'm dying to know, who's your fave?
Well,
have you got a couple?
I've kind of got a couple. There's one group that I have loved pretty much since their inception. They're a bit more mainstream. There's Panic at the Disco, which it started out as sort of a pop punk group, which I discovered when I was in my little pop punk phase, but they've kind of expanded and explored and changed over time, and so I've always kind of appreciated the way that they've changed. They had sort of their very pop punky thing. They had a bit of a Beatles phase in the middle where it was all very kind of strumming guitar, very loose, kind of lots of harmonies, very Beatles, very kind of Sgt. Pepper vibes there. And then it kind of has moved into a more modern but also kind of almost big bandy phase, which I really appreciate as well. So that group, I also have always really enjoyed Pink, which is probably the most sort of pop music that I get. But then after that, it's stuff like I really enjoy Enya, which is an Irish artist, and she kind of defies putting her into a genre. She just does whatever she wants, and I really love that. There's a Danish electro swing singer called Caro Emerald, who I love. And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, there is a Mongolian rock group called The Who that I love. the cameraman has just done the 2 thumbs up. And there's I can't remember if they're Finnish or if they're Danish, but it's a death metal group called Death Clock.
Jess, you really have a very eclectic choice
Yes,
of music.
I do.
I was expecting something really kind of mainstream, but no, you really surprised me.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy finding stuff from all over the place. There's a Finnish singer called Samuli Putro who I love as well. So I love sort of finding music from all over the world, and like not just traditional music from all over the world, but modern music from all over the world, seeing how each different culture has embraced the modern sort of technology and the modern sounds that have come about, and are they influenced by Western or opposing cultures and all that sort of thing, which I find fascinating because I'm a giant nerd about these things.
I just love your choices. They're just so different.
Yes.
Now, going back to the band just for a little bit.
Yes.
When did the band realise they could make something from their music? So you started in 2017.
We did.
When did you feel that, oh gosh, this is actually quite successful, other than just kind of playing at home and everything? When did you say, I think we're actually going to make a success of this?
Well, that's really interesting because there's a part of me in here somewhere that's still always very surprised by how successful we are. I turn around and I'm like, people are recognising me, or that's all good.
Should we do that one again?
Sure. Just gonna.
So shall I just?
Am I still in the right spot?
Yeah,
cool.
that's good, yeah.
So when did you know that you were?
We'll just wait for the that's it.
There we go. It's kind of funny because there is that part of me that is always surprised by how successful we are.
You don't have imposter syndrome, do you?
I always have imposter syndrome.
Most creative people do.
Absolutely. I always have it. I like to joke around and say that I bluff my way through life. I fake it until I make it, and so far that faking it until I make it has landed me a degree, a car and a house, so I'm rolling with it.
I actually think that you have made it, don't you think? Or do you
logically.
When did somebody in the family say this is going really well?
Well, I think because our first sort of year was still kind of ironing out some of the kinks. We did a few performances, we started writing and everything. 2018 was where it really started to rocket off because we ended up somewhat fast-tracking the first release of our first single in order to submit it for potentially being part of an ad campaign for the Rotary group, which do lots and lots of sort of fundraising and helping all around the world. And so we kind of fast-tracked our first single, as it were, to try and tie into that, and that kind of got released around May. And so we ended up kind of doing that single and then our first EP not long after that in the first half of 2018. And then we got picked up by the A&R department, which is a publishing company over in the East Coast, and ended up releasing our second EP in October of the same year. And then, not long after that, we did a launch in December of 2018, and then in January of 2019 we went and did a tour of the East Coast. So we went and did an interstate tour, and then came back and then started filming music videos and releasing more singles. So 2018 is kind of where everything exploded for us, and kind of about halfway through that whole process we kind of were looking at each other going, this has actually turned into something quite impressive. Which is fantastic, and we've loved every minute of it. But I think because it's all happened it all happened very quickly, we didn't really have any chance to turn around and be like, oh, we've managed to make quite the success of ourselves. We've kind of just had that period of turning around and reflecting now. because of COVID and everything kind of slowing down. We had the space to kind of turn around and go, oh, look at all that stuff we've done in the last 2.5 years.
And you and I live in the same district,
yes.
In Armadale, and you're pretty well known in Armadale. It's like, if people don't know you, then they don't know much. You're very well known in the area. How does that feel?
Well, I mean, I don't really recognise that I'm super well known because I just kind of go about my life, and a lot of my life is, funnily enough, not always connected to me as a performer, because I'm a music teacher. That's kind of my bread and butter. So for me, if someone kind of calls out my name in the shopping centre, my first thought is, oh, it must be one of my students, as opposed to being someone recognising me from the band. But it was quite funny. This Saturday just gone, I was on the door for a gig that happened. It's like one of the first big gigs to happen in the last few months. And at the end of the night, someone walked across the room to me and went, "You're from the Skelton Collective, aren't you?" And I went, yes I am. And they told me how much they enjoyed our music and everything, and I just wasn't expecting it at all, because I was just on the door. I was just the door chick that day. But people are recognising us as a group and me as a singer, and that's something that's...
You definitely shouldn't have imposter syndrome then.
Oh. I mean, you say that, but it's still there.
I know exactly what you mean. And in regards to COVID, how has that affected the band at all? I know that you were pretty busy for a while there, and then when COVID struck, you probably, being a band, you weren't able to play face-to-face. So how did you cope with that?
Well, yeah, that's a good one. I remember, because the day that they announced all the total lockdowns of all the pubs and everything, I was driving home from a gig. So we had just done a gig and we were driving home, and I was just sitting there in the back seat of the car, surrounded by gear, listening to the government take away half of my career, take away half of my job, which was very hard at first. And then the very next day, because I teach at 2 different places. One of the places that I taught at was a primary school, and so the day after we got told that we weren't allowed to gig anymore, I went, and they essentially told me that that was my last day on campus, that I wasn't allowed back on campus anymore. So in the span of about 24 hours, I lost 2/3 of my job, which was not easy, not easy at all. I was very, very lucky because I started a business with Daniel and Craig and Deb. We kind of created a business that we could all operate under as performers and teachers and everything. And we kind of just made it into the 12-month thing, so we were able to apply for JobKeeper, which was really lucky. But it did mean that I essentially went from working 6 days a week and then teaching on the 7th day, rehearsing on the 7th day, to working 3 days a week. I lost half of it just right off the bat. And it meant that I had a lot more time to myself, which was kind of nice. But it did also mean that I just was left just kind of floating and flailing and not sure what to do with myself. It settled down after a little while. Once I found out that I was able to get the JobKeeper, and once I found out that I wasn't kind of being completely kicked to the curb by everything, it helped to settle down a lot of it. It was just the uncertainty that really messed with me. But in terms of the band and all that sort of stuff, it's kind of been a mixed blessing. It's meant that we haven't felt the pressure to be gigging all the time, because all of us have full-time lives outside of the band as well. You know, Deb is a primary school music teacher. Daniel works at a music shop and teaches. I teach. Craig is a professional accompanist and musician. Like, that's what he does all the time. So it meant that we all had that little bit more sort of space to not feel pressured
And I
to
suppose
be out there.
I suppose there's also the positive thing of not having that pressure as well, and the seriousness of what the pandemic actually is. That I guess a few musicians that I've now spoken to have said, well, we're one of the groups that are at main risk, you know, and we're glad really that we're safe and we
Pretty
can work
much.
online if we need to.
And that's
You've done
kind
some
of,
new online
we
things,
have,
haven't
yeah, and so that kind of really helped us all, because it meant that we were still able to be creative and still able to connect with people, but in a way that was much safer. So we did one, and we called it a driveway gig because we set up on my parents' driveway. And that one was especially fantastic because we were performing to the camera and we had the live stream going, but after we started, all the people from down the street started pulling out camping chairs and sitting out in the street. And like, everyone was all like separated because they were all just outside of their own homes. But they just, it turned into a street party kind of. It was great. One lady started like, she just kind of like walked into her house and walked out, and she had like this monster tray of Anzac biscuits and started handing them out all up and down the street. And it ended up being a really fantastic vibe and a really fantastic just energy that really lifted our spirits and moving into the rest of it, because it happened, not too long after everything completely shut down. It was sort of around the same time as Mother's Day, so quite early on in the piece, as it were. And then Craig and I have a duo that operates sort of under the same banner as the collective, where we do sort of covers as well as originals, and just gives us that sort of opportunity to kind of make some more money and fund the band a bit more, spread the word, as it were. So we were part of the Artists of Armadale
Doing the online
thing. I'm trying to remember the word. Operation, I guess. Program, one of those. And so we were the first group to do the Artists of Armadale live stream. Craig and I as the duo, and then the band as a whole got invited back to do it again a bit later on down the track, which was great. That kind of meant that there was that opportunity to expand and to still perform and to still kind of connect with people.
So how do you feel about doing things online?
I mean,
it's different.
It's very different, but also for the past couple of years, I've kind of been of the opinion that in order to gain any kind of international success, you need to sort of dodge the mainstream kind of radio play and lean more towards YouTube, lean more towards podcasts and streaming and everything anyway, because that's where people go to get their media nowadays anyway. Everything's streaming, everything's online, everything's increasingly more and more about what you can access from your own home, which is frustrating as a live musician because nothing is the same as performing live. That energy, that experience is irreplaceable. And I think this COVID situation has proven that to a lot of other people, because they've realised how important it is to get out there and to experience live music and to experience those energies and that kind of once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because every gig is a once-in-a-lifetime gig. You know, they're never
It's
exactly
not funny
the same.
that you're talking about, you use the word gig, which is very cool, but you could be in any form of art. And
Oh,
have a
absolutely.
gig, couldn't you?
Oh, definitely. Gig is just
Performance, anything at all.
you know.
And so, okay, so now we get to a difficult one.
Okay.
creative block.
Yes.
Have you ever gone through that and, ever felt like giving up? I can remember you said something about perhaps doing that at one stage. And how did you get through that?
Well, that's a good one. I'm actually going through a little bit of creative block right now, actually. The song that we've been working on, everything is perfect and all set up except for the lyrics, and it's just not coming, it's not happening. Usually there's at least 1 or 2 lines that I can then expand upon. If, that's one thing that my degree really did for me, was being able to, in the same way that my musical education has meant that after the creative stuff starts to slip and go down, there's the theory and the theoretical knowledge to then kind of push through that little bit of a barrier and be like, well, if I can't just create what's coming next, I know enough about what forms and structures are in place to then just kind of build it up from there, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So in the same way that I have that for music with my musical education, I have that for my lyrics with my degree, in that, after the creative juices start to slow down, I can then just be like, okay, so this is the rhyme structure that I've created, this is the topic that I've created, now I can just kind of analytically and academically work on it until the creative juices pick up again. So that is something that I use a lot if I have those sort of peaks and dips. But when I come to a complete and utter block, it kind of doesn't always do the thing we want.
Have you, I'm sure it'll come back, because you're such a creative person and such a rich personality.
Thank you.
I'm sure it will. So in the past, when you've had these issues, and I can hear that you have a really great educational background in regards to music.
Thank you.
So would you say that if you were giving advice to another young person that is going through that, so say if we were talking to another Jess, and Jess is sitting in the chair instead of myself, what would you say to Jess now? How would you help her go through that?
Basically, I would say to take a step back. If you're having a block about a specific project, whether it be musical or drawing or writing or anything that you've set your mind on this time, and you're really struggling, take a step back and do something completely different. So if you're writing a poem or writing a story and you just cannot figure what comes next, take a step back, go online, find a prompt generator, get a prompt and just write for 15 minutes on that prompt, something completely different, and do that every day until you feel like you have enough creative juices flowing to go back to the original project. If you're doing creative drawing and visual art, just take a step back and doodle. Draw eyes until you feel like you can't draw eyes anymore. Draw hands until you feel like you can't draw hands anymore. Just draw spirals until you're done. And that physical act of doing it will help to create those flows. For music, just sit down at a piano. Sit down at whatever instrument you feel most comfortable with and just noodle.
Do you have to be on your own? Does it help to have people around you? I know other creatives that have been in the interviews have said that sometimes being around other creatives is kind of a bit of a push.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, when it comes to like creative processes, it's a mixed bag. It depends on what my emotional state is at the time. There are some times where I'm feeling so vulnerable and so fragile that if I'm around other people, I feel pressured to exist at a level higher than what I can actually commit to, that I'm capable of at that time. So it's better to just kind of withdraw a little bit and just focus on doing it by myself. And there are other times where I've gotten so inside my head that it's better to just throw ideas at other people and see what sticks. And having that sort of one or two really supportive people who you trust with your terrible, terrible ideas, because gosh, there are terrible, terrible ideas, and I have many of them. But having those sort of one or two friends or family members or whoever it is, where you can just throw the idea out there and they can kind of go, that bit's good, that bit's garbage, on a whole you're on the right track. And it helps you to sort of battle the imposter syndrome, battle the kind of the block as a whole, because I find that for me the creative block is always a combination of being too tired, either physically or emotionally, so it's hard to draw on any creative reserves because they've already been expended elsewhere. An upswing in things like imposter syndrome or anxiety or depression or anything like that, and a pressure, whether that's external or internal. And those things that combine together generally are what create the block, or at least that's what happens for me. If I'm feeling really worn down and I feel like there's a pressure to perform, whether it comes from me, which is where it comes from most of the time, let's be real, or if there's like a deadline or a time crunch that I feel is there, even if it's not there, and then my imposter syndrome kicks up, and then all of those things combine to create the block. And I think part of it is like a fear of failure, but also a fear of success as well.
This resonates with so many different genres of the arts.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sort of hearing in my head these little yes, I get that. So it doesn't matter what type of work you do or where you come from, or...
I think one of those things is that creative block is a universal symptom of creativity in itself. You have those feelings and those emotions that you want to express, but you don't know how to express in whatever medium it is that you work in. And then, like I said, you have those pressures, either internal or external. You have the drain that comes from being creative, because it is exhausting sometimes to be creative and to consistently be creative, to constantly draw on those wells of creativity and emotion, can be supremely draining.
Maybe that's what your new song should be, the lyrics should be about.
Well,
about
maybe.
being creative and dealing with syndromes and things like that. I'm hearing it already. So, is there any particular time of the day or any special place that you go to inspire you to do the writing and to do the creative thing?
That's a good question. I think there's two sort of times that I find the best. One of them is actually kind of tied into the family as well. Like, as long as I can remember, one of my mother's favourite things to do is to watch the sunset over the water at the beach. And because we're in Western Australia, we're very lucky, because we're one of those places where you can just sit on the beach and watch the sun set, which you can't really do, especially not anywhere else in Australia. So having that sort of feeling, not only the calmness of the water and the beautiful colours of the sky as the sun sets and the feeling of the sand between your toes, but also then that emotional connection to my mother and to family in general, generally gives me enough of that sort of safe space and that kind of groundwork to then be creative from. The other thing is that I'm a giant night owl. I am useless in the morning most of the time. So for me, if I'm ever really, really stuck, I will jump in my car and I will find the nearest sort of highway or freeway and I'll just go for a drive. The feeling of it being sort of 2:00 in the morning, so nobody else is on the road, the window down, so there's the wind in my hair and the coldness on my face, and I find that really helps. For about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I feel like that time of the day is especially magical to me. There's generally nobody else on the road. There's nothing else kind of in the way, so I get that kind of freedom that I need.
Do you put music on as well in the car?
Yes, sometimes I do, definitely. In fact, almost all the time. And I find that whatever music I'm playing is either connected to how I'm feeling at the time or connected to what I'm thinking about creatively. So if I want something kind of heavier or more emotional, I'll play something a bit heavier. If I want to really connect to something calm, I'll play something calm. There was one time I had my birthday present from my grandparents was to go on a hot air balloon ride. And so I had to take myself out to Northam in time to jump on a hot air balloon at like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
So I was driving at about 3 o'clock in the morning. And so, I got in my car and I had my window rolled down and I was playing Nightwish, which is a sort of melodic metal group. And I had their album that's based on a lot of old poems. So a lot of the lyrics are taken from old poems, and they've just kind of created this operatic metal album around it. And I'm sitting there just driving from Perth out to Northam at 3 o'clock in the morning, wind in my face, playing this music super loudly, and it was one of the best feelings ever. Because it was completely all the beautiful swerving roads, lots of trees.
Being an artist, a painter, I'm visualising this.
Yeah.
I'm seeing this on a canvas.
Oh yeah, and it was it was perfect for creativity because I had a fantastic morning and then I went to a rehearsal afterwards. And I think it's one of the best rehearsals I ever did. It just got all of those creative feelings and creative juices flowing because it was just the perfect combination of sort of the different senses being engaged. And there was that freedom that I personally love to put into as much of my creative product as possible.
And how did the ballooning go?
Oh, it was a hoot. I loved it. It was so much fun. I took so many photos. And then, funnily enough, another local artist asked to take those photos to then use as a reference and use as inspiration for some of their artwork. So
fabulous.
It all kind of feeds into and out of the creativity of the entire area.
I've really been blown away by this interview, and you've been so wonderful and so supportive of other people and just talking to us today. I'm hoping that some young person out there will think, wow, I need to go and listen to this lady because she's so fabulous. Thank you so much, and good luck with your wonderful career from now on.
Thank you so much. It's always an adventure. Every day is an adventure.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect, I could use some spit and polish. I find my point of view enlightened with more knowledge. And I excel when called upon to be outrageous. 'Cause I've learned from you, my captain.